One of the things we wanted to do was give an opportunity for a current Rutgers student to give a presentation, which is brief and is introduced by our graduate assistant on women in media, a PhD candidate at Rutgers, Katie McCullough. There you go, Katie. Thank
you so much. So we've been talking a lot today about body image, and the media has come up consistently. And so I feel honored to introduce one of my former students, Miranda Savioli, who stood out in the class, particularly around kind of issues of body image and gender. And she's going to be presenting on the consequences of Cosmo. And I just want to, as a small anecdote to this, I have two sister-in-laws, one who subscribes to Ms. and one who subscribes to Cosmo, and one of them has anorexia. And I don't think I need to say which is which, right? So this is something that these images, sometimes I feel like grabbing the magazine out of her hand, but Miranda's going to go into how these actually have consequences on how we view ourselves.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you all for sticking around. Like Katie said, I will be talking about the consequences of Cosmopolitan magazine and a lot of other women's magazines on how women are told to view themselves. And now, Cosmopolitan magazine started out as a very progressive media format in the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the 1970s. But now, instead of challenging the status quo, they maintain society's expectations of women rather than challenging them. And so my presentation will describe the expectations reinforced by Cosmo in terms of women's gender roles, their appearance, which is why we're here today, as well as race. And as we can see through these cover examples and other images throughout my presentation, the titles and models all reinforce society's expectations that women be thin, and that thin also means hot or sexy. So throughout the decades, Cosmo has actually created a new expectation for women that we have to be sexy and pleasing to men in order to be considered a modern woman. And all those who don't fit that definition are shamed because of it. And this is actually explained a lot better by Caroline Heldman in her TED Talk, The Sexy Lie. And we're only going to watch part of it.
Monitoring its subject dichotomy. Subjects act, objects are acted upon. So even if you become the perfect object, the perfect sex object, you are perfectly subordinate because that position will always be acted on. So there's not power in being a sex object when you think about it logically. But beyond that, this idea that sex sells, I'd like to challenge that directly, because the fact is, if sex sold, most women are heterosexual, and we are sexual beings, so why wouldn't we see half-naked men everywhere in advertising? I would like to propose that something else is being sold here. To men, they're being sold this idea constantly that they are sexual subjects. They are in the driver's seat. It makes them feel powerful to see images of objectified women everywhere. And for women, we are being sold this idea that this is how we get our value and this is the way to become the ideal sex object, which is why instead of sex selling, these ideas of subjectivity and objectivity are being sold. So we see men's magazines with scantily clad women, and we see women's magazines with scantily clad women. Moving now to the research. Self-objectification is a phenomenon where we, girls and women, view our bodies as sex objects. And all of us do to a greater or lesser extent, and this varies somewhat by sexuality and somewhat by ethnicity, but by and large, all women face this in the US. So, self-objectification, 10 years of research, mostly done by psychologists. We know that it has some pretty severe effects. I'm going to run through the list, but I want to concentrate on just a few of these items. First, the more we think of ourselves and internalize this idea of being sex objects, the higher our rates of depression. We also engage in habitual body monitoring much more when we view ourselves as sex objects. What is habitual body monitoring? The men in the audience, this might be news to you. It is not news to the women in the audience. We think about the positioning of our legs, the positioning of our hair, where the light is falling, who's looking at us, who's not looking at us. In fact, in the 5 minutes that I've been giving this talk, on average, the women in this audience have engaged in habitual body monitoring 10 times. That is every 30 seconds. Eating disorders are much more prevalent with those who see themselves as sex objects, as well as body shame, and depressed cognitive functioning. If we're engaging in habitual body monitoring, it simply takes up more mental space that could be better used completing math tests, completing your homework. It just sucks our cognitive functioning. Also, sexual dysfunction. So this idea that sex sells, isn't it strange that if you think of yourself as a sex object, and we're raised in a society that raises little girls to view their bodies as projects to work on and be sex objects, that it actually gets in the way of good sex?
I think those are all things that we've all been able to relate to throughout our lives at some point, or even throughout this presentation that I've been giving. So to continue on that note, Cosmo has helped to define the ideal role for women, especially their role in relationships, through their feature articles and their advice about sex with men. And the magazine teaches the audience, the reader, you all out there, that the modern woman should be submissive to a male's needs and put his desires before her own. And this is harmful for both men and women in the relationship, and it also excludes anyone who doesn't fit the heterosexual norm. Why can't the fun and fearless woman be independent, be single, be transgender? And then Cosmo also creates a very harmful relationship, not with other people, but why we're all here today, the relationship that we have with ourselves and how we view ourselves. All of the cover models that we see are mostly Caucasian, and they're all unreasonably skinny. And then titles such as Your Body Only Firmer teaches the reader that we should never be satisfied with our body, that we're always a project that needs to be improved. Even their health section, which is called Hot and Healthy, gives hot the precedence before healthy. How much are we willing to sacrifice to fit their definition of attractive? And then proven throughout the images that we'll see further, our weight and appearance must always be on our mind. And then they have a quiz here that we can take together. The biggest thing I focus on while having sex with a new guy is making sure I'm pleasing him. I think that's a very selfless answer, but apparently I'm wrong. The biggest thing I focus on while having a sex with a new guy is giving and getting pleasure, which I think is a win-win situation, but apparently I'm wrong again. The biggest thing, according to Cosmo, that I should focus on while having sex with a new guy is hoping I don't look flabby. And then if we continue on to their website, even though the section is titled Health, all of their tabs are about being skinny and dieting and making sure you're thin. So a lot of their headlines, such as Love Your Body, also come with further headlines such as flat abs in 6 minutes. How are we supposed to love ourselves if they keep on telling us how we're not good enough? Why can't I be happy without worrying about the latest diet fad or the quickest way to lose weight? Women's race also comes into a big play with Cosmo. They even created a separate magazine for Latina women, but we learned a long time ago that separate does not mean equal. Even in the mainstream editions, it's rare to find a woman of color in there, especially on the cover, and Asian models are the hardest ones to find as well. So the biggest question is, what can we do about all of this? Cosmo brings in millions of dollars in revenue every year, so it's unlikely that we're going to see it go away. And the simple fix is to stop reading Cosmo. We can avoid it, but we can't avoid the messages that it puts out there. We're all subject to this because Cosmo keeps on getting printed. So one of the biggest things that we all need to start doing is getting into the habit of recognizing these images. Recognize the womanizing articles and the difference between hot and healthy. There are also campaigns actually against Cosmo. The Anti-Cosmo Mission is a Christian mission trying to get the magazine to curb back on the sexual messages that it is giving out to young women. Victoria Hearst, who's actually the heir to the Hearst company, which is the owner of Cosmopolitan magazine, endorses this campaign. But if this isn't your type of thing, there's also websites such as Reddit or Jezebel, a feminist website, where you can join the conversation about the harmful messages put out by Cosmo. And now we are in the 21st century, so it is easier than ever to make your own media. Make a satirical statements to help women recognize these negative messages being put out there. Or better yet, make the media and the messages that you want to see, because chances are other women want to see them as well.